Okay. Hello, everybody. We are live. It's not 8 just yet, so we'll give it a minute before we actually begin with the class. But we are live on Facebook. I was going to say Instagram, but I don't have Instagram. We're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're going to be delving into the second installment of the crash course in Jewish history. I'm Rabbi Chernitsky, Director of Chabad of Newfoundland. Honored to be here. In case you don't know, we have a very exciting event coming up in 2 Wednesdays from now. Wednesday, June 16th at 7 p.m. Newfoundland time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. We have a Holocaust survivor, very special lady, Angela Ores-Richt. She was born in Auschwitz. She's one of 2 known babies to be born and survive in Auschwitz. So it should be a fascinating story. You could find the link to buy the tickets in our Facebook page. Otherwise, it's bit.ly/born in Auschwitz. At any rate, now it is 8 o'clock, so we'll begin with the class. So we began last class from the beginning, laid the ground rules that we're going to be following Jewish tradition and Jewish historians. We started from the creation of the world 5,781 years ago. And we said the 2 main lessons that we took from the times of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava in Hebrew. We said number 1, we said that we all have this sense of something is lacking. We always want something more. We're not satisfied with what we have. And that comes from the time when Adam was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and that he always wants to go back to the Garden of Eden. We all come from Adam. We're all descendants of Adam, one way or the other. And we also always want to go back, maybe literally, maybe proverbially, to the Garden of Eden. We know that there is a better state of being than the current state of being. Our house, no matter how big, is never enough. Our salary, no matter how big, it's never enough. And so on. The second lesson from that is the value of one individual. Just like Adam was created alone and then Eve was created from him, that one person like the whole world, and one person could change the world. And we said that's where we find the Bible is always focused on one person who affects significant change. That's a side lesson, of course. And the focus isn't on big nation civilizations. That is always the background. But the focus is always on the one person who can make a significant difference. Why is that important? Because you too, I don't know who are the people watching this, but you could also make a change. And with that, we'll start today's lesson. So we left last time off by the flood. We said there were 10 generations from Adam, the first man, until Noah, the famous Noah who built the ark. There were 10 generations. Also today, we're going to get to the next 10 generations, which is Abraham. Okay, so 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. And what's interesting is that the time span between those two is very different. From Adam to Noah, there's about 1,500 years of history. From Noah to Abraham, there's about 450 years of history. So significantly less. And the time span started to be a lot less after the flood. Also, interestingly, by the way, the commentaries note that the sizes of animals went down after the flood. So if anybody had questions about dinosaurs and a biblical source, this is your source. Okay, so let's begin here. And I'm always reminded I went to present last year at MAN for an anthropology class. The professor asked me to present. And I opened up the class saying a story. There was a psychologist in Los Angeles. His name is Dr. Hamnick. He's a religious Jew. And he was attending a conference that was organized by one of the students of Sigmund Freud, the famous psychologist, the father of psychoanalysis. And this organizer gets up at the convention and he says, why is it that we find that every civilization, every culture has a story that the whole world gets wiped out. There's the story of the flood in the Bible. The Hammurabi has a similar story, and so on and so forth. So he said that that's because his explanation is because we all have an innate fear of death, and by having these stories, that's how we cope with it. So this Dr. Hamnick is at this convention, and he gets up and he says, respectfully, I have another suggestion, another idea why there's a story of the flood. Perhaps because it really happened. And the organizer says, my teacher, Sigmund Freud, once said that we will never know who's stronger, the tiger or the polar bear, because the two will never meet. Likewise, you and I are coming from completely different angles. We are coming from completely different backgrounds, and we look at things completely different. So, number one, what I'm saying now is look at it with an open mind, instead of coming from the position which a secular world tends to have, that the whole story is baloney and it never happened. Come with an open mind. Think that maybe it did happen. I believe it happened. And number two, connect number one, is to give it a chance. So what's interesting is that they found a document in Nippur, which is ancient Babylonia, and this was written in the 19th century before the Common Era. And there it also describes a great flood that destroyed the whole civilization. Only one family survived by building a boat. There's another document found, the 7th century before the Common Era, an Assyrian text, a very similar story about a flood that destroyed the world, very similar to the story of the Bible. And there's a whole bunch of similar stories found in different cultures. There's something found in the Sri Lanka, New Guinea, Russia, China, and American Indians also have, and there's many others that I'm not going to mention here. And it's one of the big conundrums in anthropology. How could it be that so many different civilizations that didn't communicate with each other, didn't have anything to do with each other, come up with the same story? My suggestion is because it happened. It's a story mentioned in the Torah, right? Story of Noah, that God tells him to build an ark, bring in from every animal, right? From the kosher animals, 7 pairs, not kosher animals, 2 pairs, and there was 120 years from when God told him until he finished building the ark. And that's how much time the people of the time had to repent. We spoke about it briefly last class, that there was a lot of lawlessness and immorality happening at the time. And the flood was a way to purify the world, give it a restart, just like we're restarting the Newfoundland economy. Give it a big restart and try again. Okay. So we'll move on. That's it for the flood, and we're going to speak about now the time after the flood. So just in brief, after a year in the ark, the water subsides. Noah, his 3 children, his wife, his 3 children, 3 wives, they come down, and he brings a sacrifice. He gets intoxicated. Long story short, his children have children, and then we move on to the Tower of Babel, and that's also when paganism took hold very, very strongly. Okay, this is already 450 years after Noah. As we said, it's about 10 generations from Noah at the times of Abraham. And this is the time when there was a megalomaniac emperor called Nimrod. He was the king, and he wanted to control the whole world. And how did he control the whole world? By making himself into a god. We know that Pharaoh in Egypt, how did he have so much control? He claimed he didn't have to go to the bathroom. What did he do? He used to go to the bathroom early in the morning and not go the rest of the day. That's why we find that God tells Moses in the book of Exodus to go speak to Pharaoh early in the morning when he's going to the bathroom, to show him really you have no power at all. You're not God. And anyway, the point is that throughout history, we find that paganism, saying there is no Almighty God, I am God, the leader, the king, he's God, or he comes from a God, as we find in different mythologies and so on. That was a way to control everybody. I am God, so do what I say, right? More recently, Soviet Russia, Stalin and Lenin were in essence gods, right? They were the father, right? Stalin was the father of all the nations. They were referred to as our beloved father. And so too many other nations. But for the Jewish people, no such thing. We find that all the kings had a prophet that would remind them, rebuke them. You can't just do whatever you want. It's great that you have the power, but maybe you're not God. There is a God running the world, and you need to listen. In other words, what's the key to a moral functioning society? What's the solution to the issues that they had during the flood? Clearly, is the fear of God. If you don't have this sense that you're responsible, that the supreme being that made you, he keeps tabs on everything we do, and one day we have to look at him in the eye and tell him our life story, then why should I do what the government says? Why should I do what this person says? I can do whatever I want because I think that that's right. So the submission to supreme authority is essential for law and order. What's interesting is, some point out that at the time of this king Nimrod, that's when technology began to develop. Not technology like computers, but that's when they began developing bricks and making buildings and so on. And one second. One second. Look at my notes. Yeah. So at this time of Nimrod, the 450 years after the flood, humanity was experiencing technological breakthroughs that were unheard of before, and they learned how to make bricks. They started to make taller buildings, and they ended up making the Tower of Babel, which symbolized the drive for bigger and better technology, to the point that they believed they were challenging God. Like, look, God gave us, the bricks, the knowledge how to make them, but ultimately we can make this huge tower so that, so to speak, will reach the heavens. Nimrod is the one that started with imperialism, that certain groups have the essential right to conquer, dominate other groups, and he's the one that started it. And as we said before, we see how it played out through history even now. Nimrod means to rebel, because he rebelled against all moral constraints. Not only did he say that he was a god, he said he was the only god. In his time, when they built Tower of Babel, that was his symbol of dominance over all civilization. Okay? He's ahead of technology. It says that he was a great hunter, not that he hunted animals, but he hunted people. He went after people that were weaker than him. Yeah, I shared today in the other class we had a class about the Hebrew alphabet. We're studying with the letter Yud. The Yud looks like like one dot. So it's a story about a famous rabbi when he was a child, the Chais of Lublin, and his teacher told him, when you see two dots in the Hebrew Bible, it refers to the end of a verse. He also knew from previous classes that two dots, this 2 times the letter Yud, that looks like a dot, refers to God's name. And so whenever this child would get to the end of a verse, he would say God's name, because he mixed up the two. God's name is 2 dots, one next to the other. The end of a verse is represented by what looks like a column, 1 dot on top of the other. His father realized this, and he said, no. There's a big difference. The 2 dots next to each other, that's when 2 people are respecting each other. Yud sounds like the word Yid. Yid means a Jew in Yiddish. So when the 2 people are equal, to see themselves as equals, then God says, I want to rest amongst them. That's God's name. 2 dots next to each other. But when one steps on the other person's head, when the other one thinks that he's better than the other one, could push him down, that's the end of a verse. That represents separation, being cut off. That's the opposite of the indwelling, bringing down of the mighty God's presence. So that was a side note. So this is what Nimrod did, even though it was a time when people were more united. He wanted to rule over everybody. He's better than everyone else. And that's why he didn't last. What was we find that Abraham and him were enemies. Why? Because Abraham wouldn't subdue himself to Nimrod's authority. So Nimrod wanted to kill him. Abraham was the first one to bring the idea of monotheism into the civilized world, which, number one, was already against Nimrod, who said he is God, the only God. But more importantly, he wouldn't subdue himself to his authority. And there's an interesting story. A senator from Ohio, Senator Taft, so he approached the President Truman at the beginning of the Cold War, and at the time only the United States had the atomic bomb, and half joking said, President Truman, why don't you just drop a bomb on Moscow and prevent the long struggle that we're going through and we're going to have to deal with. So what did Truman say? He said, if I would not have to meet my maker, I would accept your advice. There's a moral restraint that holds people back from doing these things. And that's what Abraham represented, the opposite of Nimrod. Nimrod says, I'm God, I can do whatever I want. Can you imagine if Hitler had the atomic bomb? It's unthinkable, right? We know that certain countries would get very nervous if they have access to nuclear weapons, right? Because there's no moral conscience. Abraham was born into that world, which, unfortunately, we see some of it now, was corrupt and on the verge of self-implosion. Those 450 years from Noah to Abraham, those 10 generations, that set the stage for a turning point of civilization, embodied in this person, Abraham, because if it wasn't for Abraham, the world would have continued in that path of paganism, advancing technology, and imperialism. The moral restraint which is necessary for humanity to exist, that is the legacy of Abraham. So we'll wrap it up here for today. We covered 2 units, which is very good. If you have any questions, comments, critique, you could drop a note now, They say that President Bush Sr., he said that it's not our job to punish terrorists. That's God's job. Our job is to arrange the meeting. At any rate, if there's no questions, we'll wrap up. Have a good evening. Thank you for joining. Feel free to share the class. God willing, we'll continue next Thursday, same time, 8 p.m. Newfoundland time. If you didn't check it out yet, we have an event coming up Wednesday, June 16th, 7 p.m. Newfoundland time with Holocaust survivor Angela Orris-Richt, who was born in Auschwitz. Check our Facebook page for the ticket details. Have a good night, everybody. All the best.